Hi everyone, Quiveen here from the comfort of my kitchen. In today's video, we are going to be taking a look at a different class of objects, the dwarf planets. So, of course, almost every month I put up a video about a given planet, and later this month we will be talking about Neptune. So I will have ran out of planets in our solar system. I will, of course, go back and cover various planets again. But there is another class of objects, and we will be looking at this class of objects over the coming months, looking at each one individually. But here we go, Pluto, the most famous, a dwarf planet. Now, this is quite early in August. We'll move a little bit later. And there you can see that Saturn, sort of on a similar line to Pluto here. If we move through the month and get the moon into the sky, you can see that the moon, moving quite close to the ecliptic, is moving quite close to Pluto there. But Pluto does orbit a little differently to the planets in our solar system. Its orbit is slightly more inclined, so it goes above and below the disk of the ecliptic a little bit more than the other planets. If we take a look over here, well, its day is thousands of hours. It does take a very long time to turn around, but its year, its sidereal period there is a little over 248, nearly 250 years for one orbit of Pluto around the Sun. You can see here it was only discovered in the 1930s by C.W. Tombaugh. It was named by a young woman who won a competition, or a girl, I believe, who proposed the name Pluto in keeping with the other planets. When Pluto was the only object like this that we knew of, it's sort of a rocky, icy ball, quite small, smaller than Mercury, way out beyond Neptune. It was the only one we knew about when we first discovered it. So it was considered a planet. It was considered the 9th planet. People started looking for a 10th planet. But when people started finding other things out past and out around Pluto that were similar, let's take a closer look at Pluto, actually, while we're here, while we're talking about it. There is Pluto. And we'll zoom in and we'll see what kind of closer look we can get here. Pluto was only imaged nearby by the New Horizons mission quite recently, so I'm not expecting Pluto to have a fantastically good image here. No, not really. Most of our images of Pluto are pretty fuzzy. We can see here that Pluto has Ix, Hydra, Styx, Kerberos. Kerberos is Cerberus, the three-headed dog. So Latinized, it's Cerberus, but Kerberos here, closer to the original Greek. Same way, Pluto and Hades. Nyx and Styx. Nyx is one of the daughters related to nighttime and darkness. Hydra is that many-headed creature. Styx is the river, and Sharon is the psychopomp, the person that brings souls across that river to Pluto, down to the plains of Elysium. So this is, in this system, Charon is very, very close to Pluto in size. It's similar to the Earth and the Moon. Charon, I think, is a little bit closer in size to Pluto than our Moon is to us, but they're quite comparably sized objects orbiting a common barycenter, just like a big planet like Jupiter and the Sun orbit a common point, so too do Pluto and Charon, and a couple of other objects that are out in this direction. So Pluto is a dwarf planet, and it was demoted or reclassified to a dwarf planet after the discovery of other objects that sort of challenged its position. And we're going to go and take a look at another one of those here. So we'll go with Aris. Aris is named after the Greek god or goddess of strife and discord, and Aris has a moon, Dysnomia, the daughter of Aris, lawlessness and anarchy. And it's believed that this name, I think this name comes from the fact that the astronomers who discovered this knew that once they had found something else that was like Pluto out here, maybe a bit too small to be a planet, but comparable in mass to Pluto, they knew that it would either have to be classified as a planet along with all the other planets, or reclassifying things like Pluto and Eris into their own category. Objects that are round or capable of maintaining their own shape, hydrostatic equilibrium, but not after clearing out everything that goes around the Sun with them. And a great example is a dwarf planet that we already knew about, Ceres. Now, I've mentioned Ceres in previous videos, I believe when I was talking about the asteroids and the asteroid belt, but if we can get rid of these things here. Ceres is in the asteroid belt, so Ceres does hug pretty closely to the ecliptic, as many objects in the asteroid belt do. We can see that it's visible here just as the sun sets, and by visible I mean above the horizon, right in the middle of Sagittarius actually, so that's pretty cool. Ceres is technically visible if you have a binoculars or a telescope, unlike all of the other dwarf planets which require really, really massive telescopes to observe. Ceres is only in the asteroid belt. It's not even as far away as Jupiter, just a little bit past Mars, and it is big. It is, almost 1,000 kilometers in diameter. This is a big ball of ice and rock. It's been known about since the 1800s. We knew about this before we knew about Pluto, but even though it was round, it was in the asteroid belt, so it was classified as an asteroid along with all the other asteroids. And I do believe it was spotted before other asteroids were. It may have briefly been called a planet. The label planet, the terminology around planet, hasn't been fixed forever. Different people called planets, different people called different things planets at different times. So Ceres here, queen of the asteroid belts, named after the Roman goddess of agriculture, giving us the word cereal. So Ceres was put into this category of dwarf planet after the category of dwarf planet was created for objects like Pluto, once we discovered that there were other objects like Pluto and that they did seem to form a group distinct from the planets. So here we go. Haumea, or Haumea. I won't try the Hawaiian pronunciation, but it is a Hawaiian name. It's named after Hawaiian deity. Haumea is a little bit more oblong, I believe, than this is showing off here. But Haumea is another dwarf planet, yet another one. Again, taking a long time to get around the sun, so we can see even closer to 300 years, so further away from the sun than Pluto is. Haumea is another dwarf planet that's out there, and the more we look, the more of them we seem to find. But because these objects are very distant and often increasingly distant from us, as well as the fact that they are small balls of ice and rock, making sure that they're round, making sure that they fit all of the necessary criteria for a dwarf planet, that is difficult. So it does take a while for dwarf planets, for these discoveries, these round objects that we've found, to get renamed as dwarf planets or get reclassified as dwarf planets rather than these other kinds of objects. So this is Arcus. Now, there may be some things out of date here. I was under the impression that Arcus had been reclassified as a dwarf planet, but it is sitting here as a Plutino, which is a name that was given to objects similar to Pluto out in this direction. So we have Plutinos and Cubanos and these other names for giving names to the categories of these objects. So there's Arcus again. We're not getting a very clear view of it. It looks like it's got a slightly shorter year than Pluto. Yeah, it looks like it has a slightly shorter year than Pluto, so maybe it's a little bit closer to us. But Arcus and these other objects, their orbits are often highly eccentric, at least a lot more eccentric than the planets. For example, Pluto's orbit is eccentric enough that it sometimes gets closer to the sun than Neptune's closest to the sun. But of course, Pluto also gets much further away from the sun than Neptune's furthest from the sun, and it's generally further from the sun than Neptune. It only crosses inside Neptune's orbit occasionally. So that's Arcus. There are a couple of others. Arcus, named after one of the deities associated with death in ancient Rome as well. We've got a few others talking or taking their names from other cultures. Sedna, or Sana, as it may now be pronounced. Sedna is a sednoid, so it is another object that's given its name to a group of objects. They're different to the Plutinos. These are, I believe, one of the things that they have in common is that they are more distant. There's Sedna, very difficult to see. It looks like it's a ball, but we can see there it takes over 10,000 Earth years for this sednoid, Sedna, to get around the sun. So this is an incredibly distant object. But it's another one of those objects that seems to be big enough to be round on its own, big enough to be a dwarf planet in that same category as Pluto. So I'm going to take a look for a couple of others. Not all of them are going to be in Stellarium. Not all of them are going to be there already, or at least they're not going to be recognized. This one is a scattered disk object, so we can see it's out there 626 annum or years, so that's how many Earth years it takes to get around the sun. So we can see that that's quite a long one. This string of numbers and letters is the identifier that it has in Stellarium here. It has now been given a name, which I may touch on in a future video, but we are after moving from dwarf planets to candidate dwarf planets. And these objects may sit in candidacy for quite a while. It can be a year or two before committees are held, votes are made, arguments are made, and it's decided whether or not these things are a dwarf planet and then what their name is in the end. So I do normally hope that you get to see some of these objects in the sky, but other than Ceres, I don't hold out too much hope. If you have a telescope or binoculars at the right time of year, Ceres is technically visible, but these other dwarf planets, they are very, very distant objects. But at the same time, I do hope that you enjoyed this brief look at those incredibly distant objects. We will deal with some of them in isolation in their own video in the future. If you'd like to catch those future videos and help to make sure they happen, then do subscribe to this YouTube channel. Like this YouTube video if you enjoyed it. You can head to my website, queebeanscontent.ie, if you'd like to read a little bit of this information and maybe get some spoilers, some previews of what I will talk about in future videos. And most importantly, I hope that you come back for the next video.